apologize. Last week, my office hours or my session is 12 to 1:30 in 4101, which is a little conference room on the 4th floor. Last week, it was moved back to my office because there was a classroom that was taken out by a water leakage during the rain. So they moved the class up to 4101, and then Sarah said, "Can you do your office hours in your office?" I said, "Sure." And so people came to me. Today I was waiting in my office. I had forgotten that the main room is 4101. I kept saying, "Where is everybody?" And it turns out there were people who were 30 feet away looking for me, not finding me. Who was looking for me today? No. Okay, just one. All right. We've solved this problem. Anyway, go ahead.
Okay, so we're going to resume our discussion of the evolution of U.S. nuclear policy. So we're slightly ahead of where Carl was in the technical, but he'll catch up and pass us, I'm sure. So this is a very detailed account of the key players and the key events just until the start of the Kennedy administration. But ironically, I think most of the characteristics of U.S. nuclear policy that we live with today came about with the start of the Kennedy administration. So I'm going to just briefly comment on a few of the items that are in the book, in this section we read for tonight, and then get into some of the material that's not in the book. So the Gaither Report is one of the featured accounts in the book. And so just, again, since everyone may not know this, it's been routine U.S. policy in many areas, in fact, in almost all areas, oftentimes to ask distinguished citizens who are not part of the government to review material and to make recommendations to the government. This isn't true necessarily in other countries, but it has a long tradition in the United States. So Gaither and other industrial figures were asked to look at how to deal with the Soviet threat in the mid to late 1950s. Eisenhower was president. We'd already had the Korean War, which was a very unsatisfactory experience. The Chinese communists had now controlled China. In 1954, French Indochina, a whole area of what came to be Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam, all under French control, fell in Vietnam to the Vietnamese communists. There was a major French garrison at what became a famous place, Dien Bien Phu. And these were a large number of French soldiers surrounded by the communists. And the French prime minister requested to Eisenhower that Eisenhower use nuclear weapons to kill enough of the attacking Vietnamese forces to save the French. France did not have nuclear weapons at the time. In 1954, the only countries that had nuclear weapons based on their detonation were the US, Soviet Union, and Britain, which detonated in 1952. Eisenhower refused to use nuclear weapons with similar logic as to Truman's logic not to use it during the Berlin blockade of 48 or the Korean War in 50 to 53. Namely, what was happening in Dien Bien Phu was very unfortunate. It was a big setback for the French. It was a big victory for the Vietnamese communists. It was not an existential threat to the United States. And that these weapons were so special and so horrific, they should only be reserved for such circumstances. Well, the Vietnamese communists overran Dien Bien Phu. It was a humiliating defeat for the French. And by the mid-50s, there was a sense that the communists were on the march, led by the Soviet Union, assisted by the Chinese, now with the Vietnamese, and with others. And you cannot rule out the effect of external events, military, political, economic, and others, that feed back on how quickly and what kinds of U.S. nuclear weapons should be developed and deployed. So this is what the Gaither Committee was dealing with. Now, one other thing on doctrine and policy, again, it's not what you say, it's what you do. The U.S. has had over the years many different nuclear weapons policies, declaratory policies, what the President of the United States says are the purposes and role of nuclear weapons. And Dulles, who was Secretary of State during much of the Eisenhower 2 terms, he had convinced Eisenhower to use the term massive retaliation. I think I discussed that briefly last time, which threatened to attack the Soviet Union homeland directly with nuclear weapons, even if they made relatively minor advances in other countries. And this massive retaliation policy was deeply criticized by a whole wave of new, younger civilian strategists who said, we don't have to have the details of this, classified information to know that by any reasonable account, this threat of massive retaliation is not credible, because we may have the capability to use these weapons, but we wouldn't have the will to use them against a limited military incursion. Among the critics of massive retaliation were William Kaufman, who's written about extensively in the book. He was actually Fred Kaplan's professor at MIT. I knew Kaufman as well. He was an extraordinarily lucid thinker and writer on nuclear strategy. A young assistant professor in government at Harvard named Henry Kissinger became somewhat more well-known later. An older political scientist at Johns Hopkins named Robert Osgood, and a man who'd been in the government and was in and out, who was a very wealthy financier named Paul Nitze, N-I-T-Z-E. All these people wrote extensively with the same punchline that massive retaliation was not credible. We had to come up with something else if we wanted to deter the Soviet Union. So this was all the background as the Gaither Committee was meeting. And they were preparing to release a report in 1957 when this amazing thing happened. The Soviet Union launched the first orbiting Earth satellite, Sputnik. S-P-U-T-N-I-K was the name of the satellite. And this, I wouldn't say it led to an American nervous breakdown, but close. The notion that the U.S., which by that time, 10 years after World War II, considered itself by far the most advanced technological country in the world, could witness the Soviet Union with a truly revolutionary technological achievement, the first Earth orbiting satellite, was such a shock, was so demoralizing to the scientific and technical and governmental and intelligence community that it really triggered a whole wave of rethinking of what the U.S. is supposed to do in technology and in nuclear weapons. By the way, this was 1957, October 57. One extreme example was it stimulated a gigantic increase in engineering and science enrollments in colleges and universities, and a big wave of new government funding to support students. So we have to have tons of super smart Americans who know this stuff if we're going to compete with the Soviet Union. There are a couple of great quotes in the book. I'll just cite one or two, I think. This is on page, see if I have it here. One. Sorry, let me see here. On page 135, where Kaplan said, it was an event that evoked hysterical public pronouncements. John Reinhardt of the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory proclaimed, quote, no matter what we do now, the Russians will beat us to the moon. I would not be surprised if the Russians reach the moon within a week. Slightly off. Edward Teller, father of the H-bomb, declared on national television that America had lost, quote, a battle more important and greater than Pearl Harbor. and there are many others. And the key thing was that the Russians had left the Earth, and the race for control of the universe has now started. So this was a big stimulus both to missile development and also to nuclear weapons development. The Gaither Committee was in the process of, from previous drafts, of recommending wide use of shelters, air raid shelters. Now, I'm old enough to remember, I was a boy, a young teenager at that time, and this was true of all the children in the country at the time. We used to have, when we were in school, elementary school, middle school now, high school, we used to have air raid shelter drills. Teachers would, they had a sheet, they would explain to us what we do in the event of a nuclear attack. We'd have to hide under our desks. And in some cases there were shelters built where you had to retreat to. And the notion was this could happen at any time. I mean, it wasn't so crippling that people were terrified every minute of every day, but this was a part of life. After the Sputnik launch, the Gaither Committee changed its report to say, more important initially than shelters, which might or might not persuade that the Soviets couldn't be so successful in a massive population attack because a lot of Americans might survive. It was more important to build a lot of new weapons, and that would deter them from attacking in the first place. So it was a shift to an offensive arms program, nuclear arms. And later on, in the presidential election of 1960, and by the way, so there was no nationwide shelter program built, which they were toying with recommending in 1957. But there was a beginning of a stimulus of major new nuclear weapons delivery vehicles. In 1960, Kennedy ran for president, and he was running against the incumbent vice president, Richard Nixon, Eisenhower's vice president. And one of the key platforms of President Kennedy, the Democrat, was the so-called missile gap. And he argued this was a critique by the Democrat of the Republicans from the political right, that the Republicans were soft on the Soviet Union, they weren't attentive to the threat, and it was vitally important for the U.S. to ratchet up its nuclear weapons program. Lots changed over the years. The other thing that happened was there was sufficient criticism of massive retaliation that the Eisenhower administration just stopped talking about it. They basically withdrew that as the policy of the U.S. They never quite replaced it. They had a different policy for defense called the New Look. The New Look was after the Korean War, where they said, you know, it's crazy for the United States to engage in land wars in Asia, where we are greatly outnumbered in military personnel, when we have great technical and military advantages. So the New Look was to invest more in nuclear weapons and less in military personnel. By the end of the administration, they established the New Look, which was a mix of both. In any event, Kennedy won that election. It's a very controversial election. I've looked at some of the historical records. I think there's a plausible case of made that Kennedy actually stole the election because his father was able to bribe certain, his father was a very famous figure, Joe Kennedy, bribed certain election officials in Illinois who did the counting of the votes a little different than had come in. And Illinois turned out to be a crucial state, just like Florida in 2000 with Gore and Bush, or in 2016, Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. In 1960, it was Illinois. And Kennedy won a very, very slim election. Nixon had to decide whether he wanted to challenge the election. He chose not to. And Nixon, for a while, disappeared from the political scene, and Kennedy became the president. Kennedy had been a young naval officer in World War II. He was a hero from an event in the Pacific called PT 109. They made a movie about it. He had no particular knowledge of nuclear matters. And he recruited a very smart bunch of people to serve in his cabinet and his national security team. Most of them also were not nuclear experts. So that was how we started with the Kennedy years. And now, not chronologically, but I want to go some of the key issues that developed over the next 15 to 20 years, because we are living with each of them to this day. The first was, the U.S. Air Force had been established in the National Security Act of 1947. Before that, they'd been a part of the Army. During World War II, there was the Army Air Corps. If we had met here in 1947, there was no Air Force. There was just people who flew planes for the Army. Starting in 47, a U.S. Air Force was established, which led to their control over all aircraft and missiles for military purposes. A piece of the Air Force was the Strategic Air Command, or SAC. SAC became very famous as the home of nuclear targeting for the United States. It's based in Offutt Air Force Base to this day in Omaha, near Omaha, Nebraska. Although later on, after the Cold War, it was changed and downgraded to the Strategic Command, STRATCOM. So SAC no longer exists. It was alive from the 50s to 94, and since 94, it's been STRATCOM. STRATCOM also lost a lot of funding and it lost a lot of control of the weapons, so there's a downgrading of STRATCOM. And it's an interesting little anecdote. I was then an arms negotiator in the Clinton administration, and I was invited to go to SAC, to STRATCOM, to understand their nuclear targeting policy. It's all highly sensitive classified stuff. And the most memorable recollection I had of the trip was there was an Air Force general who had actually supported the downgrading of SAC because he said, we don't need it anymore, the Cold War's over, Soviet Union is no more. So I was just wondering what the mood would be like, because by the time I got there, there was STRATCOM, it wasn't SAC. And in the commissary, the place where you could buy stuff on a military base, they had a T-shirt for sale, and on the front of the T-shirt it said, "Who killed SAC? Who killed SAC?" And on the back it had the name of the commander, and it said, "He killed SAC." He was not a popular guy, and probably would have been a life-threatening situation if he tried to enter the base. He's still alive, I think. Anyway, so that was later on, way after what we're talking about. So the nuclear targeting plans were called the Strategic Integrated Operational Plan. And that was the term used until 2008. In 2008, they changed the name to OPPLAN, Operational Plan 8010. OPPLAN 8010. You know, you see pictures of you're reading it all in the press about concern about Trump. He's got the satchel, and there's a guy walking with him to trigger nuclear stuff. So what actually happens there is, in Omaha, there are a bunch now of computerized options for the president to choose from. We can launch X number of warheads on target one Y number of warheads on target 2. It's the number of warheads and the target information, and also qualitatively what kind of damage can you expect from using those combination of warheads. So that's still in existence today, but it's now op plan 8010. By the way, I meant to mention there was another shock. Just as Kennedy came into office, the Soviets followed up with Sputnik with launching the first manned orbit around the Earth. Yuri Gagarin was a cosmonaut, which became the Soviet term. We use the term astronaut. And he was the first human being to ever orbit the Earth. This combination of both Sputnik and Yuri Gagarin was so shocking to the American public and to the leadership and to the elite that it was a tremendous stimulus to new nuclear weapons development. The good thing was, there's a big race, we're losing this race, and they're going to come after us, and it's going to be checkmate. McNamara was a key figure, Secretary of Defense, in trying to sort out, well, how many weapons should we have and where should we put them? What kind of delivery vehicles? And ultimately, they produced the concept of the Triad, the nuclear Triad. Triad because they're placed in 3 different types of delivery vehicles. Intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs, which are in underground silos in the upper Midwest of the United States. Submarine-launched ballistic missiles, which are placed on nuclear submarines. The nuclear submarines mean they're nuclear-powered submarines, but they're carrying missiles that carry nuclear weapons. The acronym for these submarines is SSBN, Subsurface Ballistic Nuclear. So the SSBNs carry SLBMs, Submarine-Launched Ballistic Missiles. Clear? And then heavy or long-range strategic bombers. These were like the bombers used in World War II, but now more advanced. In fact, the first B-52, which is still in the arsenal, was deployed around 1960. So it's gone through major revisions. We have an aircraft in the SIAP, in op plan 8010 today, which was first deployed 57 years ago. It's normally beyond the lifetime of the aircraft. So that's the Triad. It doesn't tell you about the weapons, it tells you about the delivery vehicles. Intercontinental ballistic missiles, submarine-launched missiles, and the bombs. They deliver the weapons. The weapons went through many changes, some very high-yield weapons in the hundreds of kilotons. Remember, Hiroshima, Nagasaki were 20, 14 kilotons. These would be in the hundreds of kilotons per weapon, or as low as much lower numbers. But beyond the weapon yield, there were other ideas about how to diversify the nuclear arsenal. Some ideas at the RAND Corporation. RAND is discussed at great length here, which was originally under the Air Force, founded by Donald Douglas of Douglas Aircraft. It was basically an Air Force think tank to think about nuclear strategy, where Wolstead worked, which we discussed last time. They came up with the idea that the weapons, which were then placed in a fashion so they could be called re-entry vehicles, that you could put multiple re-entry vehicles on a single missile. So it's like multiple bullets in a gun. Instead of just having one missile that launches one weapon, you could have one missile that detonates multiple weapons. So the first of these was the MRV, multiple re-entry vehicle. Later it was thought that because the re-entry vehicle follows a ballistic trajectory, a parabolic trajectory, that this would ultimately be too predictable and the Soviets could intercept it. So new technology was devised for multiple independently targetable reentry vehicles, or MIRVs. MIRVs became very famous in the 70s. They were deployed in the 60s, but it wasn't known until the 70s. And the Soviets followed suit. So again, you understand that MIRVs have the ability not only to be multiple bullets in a gun, but multiple bullets that can attack different targets. They could have multiple bullets hitting the same target, or you could have multiple bullets hitting a different targets. There's been work on maneuverable reentry vehicles that won't fly a ballistic trajectory. They'll move around. I don't believe they've been deployed yet, but they're deployable. There's no doubt they're deployable, both by the U.S. and Russia today. In addition, there was discussion, ultimately technological development, of a non-ballistic missile. A ballistic missile is where it's a multi-stage rocket where the first stage fires, it exhausts its fuel, and then it's discarded. Second stage fires, exhausts its fuel, and then it's discarded. Third stage fires, exhausts its fuel, and pushes into the atmosphere and beyond the atmosphere, a reentry vehicle. So it's actually happening. Yeah, this missile, which was fired here, by the time it gets rid of its earlier stages, it's basically just pushing a reentry vehicle into this elliptical orbit, and it's that which goes down to the target. And this is the atmosphere. So the apogee of the reentry vehicle is more than 100 miles up. Defense analysts said the intensity of the US-Soviet competition was so great that the Soviets will be able to figure out how to intercept even these reentry vehicles. So they said to diversify the capability even further, there was new technology, the so-called cruise missile. Now, cruise missile is completely different. A cruise missile is a low-flying, air-breathing missile that flies from point of origin to termination point, and it's at very low altitudes, but it's hyper accurate. The earlier guidance system for the cruise missile was called TERCOM. None of this is in the book. So I'm telling you what you need to know. This TERCOM stands for Terrain Contour Matching. So how does that work? The U.S. would have satellite photographs from the point of departure of the cruise missile to the point of impact, the target. They would then digitize the coordinates of the path and store that digitized information on board a computer on the cruise missile. When the missile takes off, it says, I'm supposed to be here. Am I here? And the computer would say, no, you're 4 inches off to the right. So the cruise missile would move over. It keeps following the terrain that it's supposed to follow to reach its target. And if the wind or other atmospheric conditions, meteorological developments move it around, it corrects itself. So unlike the ICBM or the SLBM, which purely will land based on the forces of gravity, the cruise missile is guided from origin to termination. So the amount of error in reaching the target is minimal. And it's claimed, for example, if there was a cruise missile that was launched off the coast of San Francisco, and they had the right coordinates programmed, cruise missile could hit 2607 Hearst and not the parking garage next door. It comes right down the hatch. And error in targeting is crucially important because you want to hit what you want to hit, and you don't want to hit what you don't want to hit. So this was another revolution in U.S. nuclear deployments. And the cruise missiles ultimately, it came in three flavors: air-launched cruise missiles, or ALCMs, ground-launched cruise missiles, or GLICMs, submarine-launched or sea-launched cruise missiles, or SLICMs. So they can be based on land, in the air, and at sea. Now, ultimately, the U.S. withdrew the ground-launched cruise missiles, which were based in Europe during the Cold War, and they've been decommissioned. And the SLICMs are not nuclear capable anymore. They just have conventional weapons. The ALCMs still exist on U.S. aircraft. So the U.S. bombers not only carry gravity bombs that will, be released by the aircraft that hit the target, like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but also cruise missiles that will try to penetrate Soviet or other air defenses. Question now, with a lot of money on the table for modernizing the U.S. nuclear force, what will be the future of ALCMs and even SLICMs? I mentioned that in weapons deployments, from the low KTs, the hundreds of KT, we had 8,000 nuclear weapons in Europe, 8,000. And together with the Soviet Union, the U.S. deployed more than 60, U.S. and the Soviet Union combined, deployed more than 60,000 nuclear weapons by 1967. 60,000. Remember what Hiroshima and Nagasaki suffered from? One. So we're talking about the age of overkill and madness, and this is crazy, and competition is out of control, and all the rest. Another dimension of this problem was, what are we going to shoot at? What are the targeting options? And ultimately, after a lot of additional intense debate and study and analysis, they fell into three categories. Again, this is the American view. The Soviet view was less well understood. There's a book, I mentioned it to the discussion session earlier today. There's an excellent author at Stanford, David Holloway, Holloway. He's a Soviet and Russian specialist, and he's written definitive books on what we know about the Soviet and then the Russian nuclear forces. There's, of course, volumes and volumes on the Americans, very little on the Soviets. So the targeting options for the U.S. were counter-force, which meant counter-military targets, which, this is not new to the nuclear age. I mean, the Pearl Harbor attack against the carriers and the battleships at Pearl Harbor, that's a counter-force attack, right? They attacked the Navy because it was the Navy that could come and visit them. They didn't attack the civilians in Honolulu. They didn't attack the hula skirts. They didn't attack the hula hoops. They went after the weapons that could hurt them, hence the term counterforce. And increasingly over time, counterforce targeting became more and more and more important and more in the ascendancy. Counter-urban industrial are those targets that basically have the industrial infrastructure to build the military. So tank marshalling yards, where the tanks are put together, ball bearing factories. These are targets used in World War II. A lot of them are in urban areas, so people will be killed in those areas, but they're not really going after the people, they're going after the industrial targets. And then finally, and this declined greatly in primacy, were counter-value or counter-population targets. It became increasingly clear in the U.S.-Soviet competition that to attack major cities and then have the retaliation against major cities is to engage in mutual suicide. Was conceivably, if their counter-force attacks more limited, it would not lead to the destruction of the entire country. So these three categories, counter-force, counter-urban industrial, counter-value, have, and they still are to this day, the main targeting options, with counter-force by far the primary one for the U.S. Questions or comments so far? Is this all horrifying to you, or do you know about it, or old hats? You don't, now that you heard it, you don't want to know about it, or what? Yes.
So the 8,000 weapons in Europe, are those 8,000 weapons that the U.S. has in military bases in Europe, or are those British and French nuclear weapons?
So those were 8,000 U.S. weapons that ultimately they had, many of them, but not all, had been delegated to NATO use as well, but virtually all of them were withdrawn. So now there are somewhat less, according to unclassified sources, a little less than 200 weapons that are under NATO control. But in fact, it's the U.S. who has to allow them to be used. And they're the ones in these 5 sites I mentioned last time, I think, in Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, Italy, and Turkey. That's where they are now. Yes.
What are the ranges on the ICBMs versus the cruise missiles?
So the cruise missiles can only go a few hundred miles, max. The ICBMs are intercontinental, so that's more than 5,000 miles. They're essentially intended to go from North America to the Soviet homeland. There's also intermediate range missiles, which go up to but not including intercontinental range. The intermediate missile was a type tested by North Korea over the weekend. And then there are medium range missiles and shorter range missiles that go even shorter distances. But the U.S. nuclear forces are largely on intercontinental range missiles. Yeah.
So I try to understand the policy behind the exaggerated number of nuclear weapons, like 60,000. Europe, is, as everybody knows, that you have countries that you cross them by
Right, they're right next to each other.
2 hours,
Right.
and then what is the policy behind?
So the rationale behind it was, first of all, you have to, so the only question was there was military service competition. The Navy and the Air Force were competing with each other to make sure they had, the Air Force had monopoly on these weapons because they controlled the bombers and they controlled the ICBMs. The Navy got into the business as a competitor, and the Navy turned out to be probably in a better situation because the submarines are thought to be invulnerable to attack, because you don't know where they are in the open ocean area. Whereas the ICBMs, you know where they are. By satellites, you can see where they are, and you see where the bombs are on the fields. So there was a bit of just competition between the two sides. But in addition, the view was that the main threat to the U.S. was a Soviet counterforce attack against the U.S., attacking all of our missiles. So we had to be sure that we had enough weapons so that even after a massive, successful first strike by the Soviet Union, we had enough of a retaliatory force that the response would be so devastating to the Soviet Union that no rational Soviet leader would start in the first place. And you start doing the so-called exchange calculations, and it drove you up to these kinds of numbers. I know it seems kind of insane today, but it was very much seen as necessary 50 years ago.
How about the policies of the UK and France? I find it harder to believe that they were able to effectively deter the Soviet Union, which I assume was their nemesis, right?
With their adversary, yes. Well, they reasoned to themselves. Again, we don't know. The thing about deterrence is you never know unless it fails, then you know. The main issue was that the British and the French, of course, had limited resources. They wanted to have a nuclear force of their own, partly for prestige, partly to deter the Soviets and not rely on the U.S. They couldn't obviously compete with the Soviet Union, but they argued to themselves that if they had a retaliatory capability that could destroy Moscow, Moscow was so central, so pivotal to everything about Russia and the Soviet Union, that would be a credible deterrent against any use of nuclear weapons by the Soviet Union against Britain or against France. Now, we don't know, it was never tested, fortunately, but that's the rationale. So their targeting was counter value, not counter force. You have to realize also, I think I mentioned, the Soviet Union now, Russia's a vast country, 11 time zones. They have nuclear forces spread all over the country. They're deeply buried targets. They're on submarines. They're on bombers that are on strip alert on airfields. So you start thinking, how many do I need to take out this one? How many do I take out that one? Supposing they've destroyed a lot of our forces initially, would the retaliatory force be able to destroy what they have left? And that's how it drives it up. We had over 30,000, they had 30,000. So what about the policy? Well, we had gotten rid of assured destruction, and we had gotten rid of massive retaliation. McNamara said, we need to cap this somewhere. So we need enough weapons of a retaliatory capability to assure the destruction of the Soviet Union. That no matter what they do, no matter how convinced they are, no matter how appealing it is to strike first and destroy America, they would be destroyed in return. They'd have to know that unequivocally. So he used different numbers like 30 or 40% of their forces and 30% of their population. He fiddled around with different back of the envelope numbers. It's largely conjecture. But the fact that, so percent of military urban destruction, so the fact that we have this capability, we thought, to survive a first strike, a disarming first strike, and then respond by destroying them. But they have the same capability to destroy us. The US policy was assured destruction against them, but the condition when we both had it was mutual assured destruction, which ironically had the acronym MAD. You understand the distinction? Our policy was assured destruction. I mean, McNamara didn't have a policy of making sure the US was destroyed. He was Secretary of Defense. His policy was to destroy enough of them so they would never attack. But since they had, we thought, a similar policy, the condition was mutual assured destruction. And MAD was the name for the nuclear relationship between the US and Soviet Union right through the end of the Cold War until 1991. At times there were other options considered, and even they were employed. They were elevated to national policy. One was Schlesinger. Schlesinger was Secretary of Defense under Nixon and then Ford. He was convinced that it wasn't enough to have massive numbers of weapons. We had to be able to target very, very selectively with low-yield weapons. So he advocated the development and deployment of limited nuclear options, LNOs. That is being considered again today by the weapons lawyers as Trump begins his presidency. Now, there are two sides to this argument. Again, it's not a scientific problem that has an answer in the back of the book. Some claim, yes, we need limited nuclear options because those are the possible ones we'll use, and that, knowing that they'll be used, they make the most credible deterrent. The flip side is, no, if you have options that encourage nuclear weapon use, they'll be used. And then we'll break the taboo of nuclear weapon use, and the whole ballgame will be up. So if you are attentive to the future evolution of this debate, starting this calendar year over new U.S. nuclear weapons investments, this issue is going to be raised this year about whether we should have smaller nuclear weapons with limited yield to attack selective targets or not. And you'll hear the same arguments that we used back in the 70s. This was, for better or worse, how I got my start in this business. I was a postdoc at Harvard when Schlesinger made his announcement, and I was not a big fan of the idea. I was more on the side of more deployment of these low-yield weapons, more likely we're going to have nuclear weapon use and nuclear war. So I worked with a colleague who was a postdoc at the time, and we wrote a paper, and we had a senior professor who had great contacts, and he was able to get a place in Foreign Affairs, which is a prominent journal that's read all over the world. And the title of our article was "The New Nuclear Debate, Sense or Nonsense." This was not welcomed by Mr. Schlesinger. But ironically, actually, I got a call from one of his advisors in a different area who became very famous during the Iraq War, Paul Wolfowitz. And Wolfowitz said, I'd never met him, I didn't know who he was. And I remember the phone call to this day. He said, I just want you to know there's not a single sentence in your article that's correct. That's point one. Point two, would you like to come to Washington and talk about a job? Which I did. I went to Washington to talk about a job I didn't take. So this is this is not just a historical significance. Later on in the Carter years, the Carter people rejected the idea, but they still flirted with it. Harold Brown had been Secretary of the Air Force. He was director of Lawrence Livermore National Lab in his late 20s or early 30s. He became president of Caltech. And he became Secretary of Defense under Carter. And he formulated, with another name, Wolf Slocum, a strategy called the countervailing strategy, which says, if they can hit us here, we have to be able to hit them here. If they can knock out Dayton, we should be able to knock out Irkutsk. It's reciprocity, proportionality. Proportionality is key to understanding what credible deterrence is, at least in the minds of Americans. Now, maybe the Russians don't think that way. That's what So we didn't want the Russians to feel that they could engage in limited attacks and that we would not respond because our only options were much greater. Do you follow that? I can just tell you, this is very much on the minds of people in this business tonight. Now, let's talk a little bit about defenses. Starting in the 1950s, there was U.S. research and development on missile defense. These are missiles that are going to intercept attacking missiles with nuclear weapons. The missile defenses don't have nuclear weapons. The missiles they're attacking do have nuclear weapons. And they became known by the acronym ABM, or anti-ballistic missiles. Work was done in the 50s and into the 60s. There had been a Harvard-MIT study group in the early 60s which said, you know what? Missile defense is not stabilizing, it's destabilizing. What do they mean by that? Normally you'd think, gee, if you have defenses, it's better to have defenses than not to have defenses. Nobody wants to be defenseless, right? That's sort of a plausible, sensible approach. But the argument here was, by the 60s, if we both had assured destruction capability, if you could destroy me and I could destroy you, that actually is a pretty stable situation, as long as we were rational. But if you have offenses that can destroy me, and I have offenses that can destroy you, and then I start building missile defenses, what are you going to think? You know what you might think?
Attack.
What would you think? What?
Attack.
Yes, that I'm going to attack you, destroy a lot of your missiles, and then when you retaliate against me, my missile defenses will take care of your retaliatory capability, and I'll win the game. So the argument that was raised in the Harvard-MIT summer study was missile defenses are strategically destabilized. It took a long time for the Kennedy team and then Lyndon Johnson, after Kennedy was assassinated, to accept this view, but they did. So then, in 1967, Johnson was president, And although Brezhnev had become the leader of the Soviet Union, Khrushchev was overthrown in '64. Brezhnev did not go, but he sent Kosygin, who was the president of the USSR. Kosygin met with Johnson in a little town, Glassboro, New Jersey. Why they did, I actually don't know. I'm sure there's some history to that. But Glassboro, New Jersey, had a nuclear summit meeting between the US and the Soviet leaders. And at that meeting, McNamara, who was very pedagogically oriented, liked to lecture, liked to explain how smart he was and how stupid you were, Berkeley guy, Harvard MBA, he gave a 2-hour lecture to the Soviet delegation on why missile defense was destabilizing. Afterwards, Kosygin said, "You're crazy. We're the Russians, we've suffered terribly with invasion. We lost 22 million people killed in the Second World War from the Nazis. There's no amount of defense we can have that's enough. No amount. We want an infinite amount of defense." McNamara says, "We understand, but this time you got it wrong. I'll send you some books." So he sent them some books, some famous books, and ultimately the Russians agreed, Soviets agreed to sit down to a negotiation on missile defense and offensive forces. I'll get to that in just a minute. Now, missile defense are being developed and deployed tonight. And they're being developed and deployed by the Soviet Union, by Russia, and by the United States. But there are problems with missile defenses, and here are at least 3 or 4 problems. These are sort of inherent problems. One is, no matter how many defensive missiles you have to intercept offensive weapons, it's cheaper to deploy more offensive arms than defensive arms. So the so-called cost exchange ratio favors the offense. So let's say you have 10 interceptors ready to intercept 10 of my missiles. I'll assume it works great. Your system is fabulous. I'll just deploy 11 missiles. So offensive dominance can saturate the defense. It doesn't matter how good the system works. You'll have enough to destroy the target. You follow what I'm saying? The second is, you can fool the ABM system. ABM system is based on a lot of networked radars, even tonight. But radars are a brain that has to differentiate the reentry vehicles that are coming down to hit them versus possible decoys. And there's been a ton of work done, massive amounts of money have been spent by both the US and Russia to develop decoys, including such simple things as chaff. Chaff is just strips of aluminum foil you can get in Walgreens. It turns out that if you release, as part of your offensive attack, strips of chaff, the radar sees them as reentry vehicles and doesn't know what's a decoy and what's a reentry vehicle. So you can fool the ABM system by decoys. And third, the radars themselves, the brains for the ABM system, are themselves vulnerable to attack. If you can destroy the radars, then it doesn't matter how many missiles are on the ABM system, it's not going to fire properly. So for all these reasons, offense dominance, decoys, and radar vulnerability, and there are others, there have been many, many skeptics about the effectiveness of ABM systems. Okay, can you stay with me for a few more minutes, or are you sick of all of this? Okay. Now, at that Harvard MIT summer study, there was a man, I think I mentioned his name, but maybe, did I mention last time, Tom Schelling? Yes, no? Anybody know who Tom Schelling is? Nobody. Okay. So Tom Schelling is the foremost American nuclear strategist of the nuclear age. And he's an economist. He's from Oakland, California. He went to Cal as an undergraduate. And he went to Harvard and got a PhD in economics. And he worked on totally separate matters about the Marshall Plan and economic recovery. And then he worked at the Rand Corporation and got involved in this nuclear strategy community. He taught briefly at Yale, and then he went to Harvard. He taught at Harvard for 30 years, and then he taught at the University of Maryland, College Park for 15 years. He just passed away 2 months ago at the age of 95, and his memorial service is in 2 weeks. I'll be speaking there. So I knew him very well, and he was a very, very special person. His book, The Strategy of Conflict, is a classic. It has a fair amount of mathematics in it. If that's not up your alley, try Arms and Influence by Tom Shelley. If you read one book on strategy and nuclear strategy, read Arms and Influence. It's just as valid today as it was when it was published in 1966. Shelley also wrote another short book with a young analyst named Mort Halpern. Do any of you watch television about the politics? Any of you follow any politics of the Trump president, of the election? Anybody here? Anybody follow it at all? No, I'm serious. So I don't know. I mean, I know a lot of students, public policy students, have no idea what I'm talking about. I mean, none. They basically know how to name, spell Trump, T-R-U-M-P. That's about it. So there's a man named Mark Halpern. Does anyone know the name Mark Halpern? He's on TV all the time. He wrote 2 major books up here. Anybody here ever heard of Mark Halpern? Nobody. He's the son of Mort Halpern. So Shelley and Halpern wrote a book published in 1961 called Strategy and Arms Control. Strategy and Arms Control. And that book laid out for the first time, it's a very thin book, I don't even think it's 100 pages, the purpose of arms control. The first thing to note is that arms control is not synonymous with disarmament. Disarmament is where you get rid of your weapons, I get rid of my weapons. That's disarmament. There were previous disarmament treaties, none of them worked. Arms control is to put limits on the numbers or types of weapons. Shelley and Halpern said arms control has 3 purposes. Reduce the probability of war occurring. Any agreement or measure that does that, that's arms control. Reduce the damage should war, that should be war, not where, occur, the typo, and the cost of preparation of war. Reducing any of these 3 constitutes arms control. This was a greatly influential book for the Kennedy administration. Kennedy administration officials attended unofficially the Harvard-MIT Summer Study of 1960-61, and they instituted plans to begin to have arms control. After the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, Kennedy was so terrified about what nuclear weapons could do and lead to nuclear war that he really pushed hard to have the U.S. engage in arms control talks with the Soviets. This led to the Limited Test Ban Treaty of 1963. This is the first modern arms control agreement, the LTBT. It limited nuclear testing to only underground testing. It didn't stop it, but did underground testing only. How could Kennedy agree to a limit? He had done all this atmospheric testing. He could agree because the chiefs and the scientists told him we could still develop new nuclear weapons from underground testing. We didn't need atmospheric testing. So this is not just altruism and peace and all that. It's a way to continue to modernize the forces, but constrain what the other guy's doing too. Later on, there was a lot of concern about proliferation. We're going to have several sessions on proliferation. This French detonated and became a nuclear power in 1960, just before Kennedy became president, The Chinese detonated in '64 after Kennedy was assassinated, when LBJ was president. There's a lot of concern about the proliferation of weapons. So ultimately, the U.S. and Great Britain, and ultimately the Russians, formulated the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT, which is the bedrock to this day of U.S. non-proliferation policy. It was signed in 1968, but this entered into force in 1970. Quick point on that in case you're not familiar. A treaty is something that's called a treaty and signed by a duly authorized representative of the U.S. government. If it's called a treaty and signed by someone who's a political appointee and Senate confirmed, that's a treaty. That just is the signature of the treaty, but it doesn't mean that the U.S. is a party to the treaty. In order for the U.S. to become a party to the treaty, this language is all very important. In order for the U.S. to become a party to the treaty, not just a signatory to the treaty, the U.S. Senate must ratify the treaty. According to the U.S. Constitution, 2/3 of the U.S. Senate must ratify the treaty. We have 100 senators, that means 67 senators. Although it's present and voting, so if a few are absent, it's 2/3 of the actual number that are present and voting. It doesn't have to be 100. It doesn't have to be 67. So, for example, we're going to talk later about the Iranian nuclear deal. President Bibber talked about Scott Kemp coming because he was an advisor on Iran. Obama knew that he did not have the votes in the Republican-controlled Senate to ratify the deal with Iran. So they never called it a treaty. It's the president's prerogative. He called it an agreement, an executive agreement. The president signs hundreds of executive agreements all the time. New Zealand fishery agreements, meteorological cooperation in the Arctic, well, zillions of them. So a way for the president to avoid the ratification process is to call it an agreement, not a treaty. But a treaty has the legitimacy of international law and is usually harder to get rid of. So this entered into force. It took 2 years before the U.S. Senate ratified the NPT. By the way, after the Senate ratifies, certain copies of the treaty have to be deposited in the national capitals of the parties, and usually Geneva, Switzerland, because that's a seat for the United Nations. Another thing that happened, seemingly unrelated to nuclear stuff, but is very important in what happened following, was the U.S. opening to China in 1972. Nixon and Kissinger believed, and they were correct, that deep animosity had developed between communist Russia, communist Soviet Union, and communist China. They fought a border war in 1969. There are a whole set of reasons for that, which I won't get into. So they tried to exploit, gain leverage on the Soviet Union by seeing if they could improve relations with China. And in a spectacular moment, because Nixon had become president, and the same guy who lost to Kennedy in the dubious election in 1960, he became president in 1968. He was a huge anti-communist figure throughout his Senate and vice presidential career. So no one expected he would do anything like this. In 1971, Kissinger was on a trip to Pakistan, and he, quote, suddenly got sick. He was unavailable for several days. While he was sick, he wasn't sick. He flew secretly to Beijing to coordinate with Zhou Enlai, Mao's deputy, about a Nixon visit to China, which would shock the world. The Chinese agreed to invite Nixon to China after the U.S. asked them to invite Nixon to China. And then in February 1972, Nixon went to China. At that time, only people read newspapers, no computers, no. The headlines were this big. This is a world-shattering event that Nixon was going to China. It was actually televised on American TV. There was no CNN, but NBC. Watched Nixon go to the Great Wall. It was just an amazing thing that this guy to visit China, the Chinese would welcome him. This had an effect in many areas we don't discuss in this class, but one was it rattled the Soviets that the US and China were going to get together against the Soviet Union. So they became more interested in arms control with the Americans. And ultimately, later that year, in 1972, was pretty important because it was a presidential election year, and presidents want to have great achievements in presidential election years. The US and the Soviet Union signed the SALT I agreement, which is the first really modern nuclear arms control agreement between the US and the Soviet Union. It had two parts. It had an interim offensive agreement that lasted just 5 years, but more importantly, it had an ABM treaty. And this codified what McNamara had told Kosygin back in '68. You can't have too many of these defensive missiles, it'll destabilize the situation. So according to this treaty, which was ratified by the Senate, both sides could only have 2 sites for ABM systems. One to defend their national capital, US Washington, Soviet Union Moscow, and one 1,500 kilometers or more away, which would defend perhaps one of their missile sites. That's it. So the ABM treaty largely preserved, ironically, the mutual vulnerability of the US and the Soviet Union, which was the intent. It's hard to believe, you and I, in order to stay friendly, want to be mutually vulnerable to attack so we won't kill each other. But that's what the ABM treaty was designed to do. When this treaty was signed and ratified, there were always, from the very outset, key critics of the whole concept of McNamara's idea. They said, these were Americans, they said, the Soviets can't be trusted, they'll cheat, we won't, they'll develop secret systems, they'll be able to defend themselves, we won't be able to defend themselves. It's a crazy idea, it's suicide, it's treason, horrible words, but Nixon prevailed. We'll get to what happened later on, because George W. Bush withdrew the United States from the Soviet Union, from the ABM treaty in 2002. Yes?
Was SALT I always called SALT I, or from 72 to 79 was it just SALT?
No,
Like, was there an
it
anticipation?
was called SALT I because they anticipated, well, actually, maybe right at the beginning it was called SALT, Strategic Arms Limitation Talk Agreements. Strategic Arms Limitation Talk Agreements. But then, not too long after that, there was a quick move to try to get another agreement, so they changed it to SALT I, which would be followed by SALT II. These were further reductions in offensive arms. But what happened was, it's ironic, the Republicans have always been much more skeptical of arms control, the Democrats much more enthusiastic about arms control. Almost all the arms control agreements have happened in Republican administrations. Why? Because when Democrats sign arms control agreements, the Republicans block it in the Congress. When Republicans sign arms control agreements, the Democrats support it, and so do the Republicans. You got it? It's highly relevant to what we're living through tonight. Carter signed the SALT II agreement in 1979. By this time, a lot of bad things had happened under Carter. I won't go through the details. But the Republicans were out for blood with Carter. And right after the signing, in December of '79, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. This was a shock. This was the first time the Soviet Union had invaded any country outside the Eastern Bloc. Carter made maybe correct, but foolish statement. He said, I've learned more about the Soviets in 3 weeks than I knew about them in the last 20 years. Suggested he didn't have any idea what the Soviet Union was about. And they realized it, and then Carter withdrew the SALT II treaty from the Senate ratification process. So this treaty, signed, never ratified, never entered into force. A couple of other things and I'll quit. Is this the end of these? Back in the 70s, when Kissinger was Secretary of State, he had initiated not only to continue the dialogue with the Soviet Union and promoting diplomatic interaction with the Soviet Union, but he called it détente. Détente, a French term for like improved peaceful relations. Détente also was deeply criticized by Republicans as saying this is crazy, this is a sellout, this is Neville Chamberlain, Munich 1938 all over again, you have no idea what you're doing. This man, Helmut Sonnenfeld, the German emigre, was Kissinger's chief lieutenant on this, and he was a Soviet expert. And Sonnenfeld wrote an interesting article, you can still read it in the Naval War College Review in 1975, which explains what Kissinger meant by détente. And the punchline is, arms control is not about arms control. Now, what the hell does that mean? The Kissinger said, yes, we're here, we're reaching all kinds of technical agreements on controlling offensive weapons, we're interested in controlling missile defenses. But that's not what I'm trying to do. That's just a means to an end. What I'm trying to do is to so sustain the dialogue between the two countries that leads to generally improved relations, which leads to economic intercourse, scientific exchange, cultural exchange, university exchange. It's opening up the Soviet Union to the West. The Soviet Union was completely hermetically sealed. You couldn't go there. And Kissinger argued that over time, it might take decades, this interaction, of which the arms control agreement was just a way to get that interaction going, would transform the Soviet Union, because people would develop all kinds of their own ideas, they learned about what was going on in the West, and they put pressure on their government not to be so hostile and aggressive toward the West. Are you following this? I'm not sure how many you are, maybe too tired. So that's what that was about. It still is controversial to this day. It's also controversial in dealing with China to this day. By the way, a tremendous opponent of this whole idea was Donald Rumsfeld, who became the youngest Secretary of Defense in U.S. history under Ford in 1974, and the oldest Secretary of Defense under George W. Bush in 2001. He always led the idea that this was either misguided or nonsensical or treasonous. So that's a bit of the history and the core ideas about arms control. I thrown a lot at you. I don't know how much you've retained or taken notes. You need to have detailed notes of what I've been discussing if you want to do well in this class. If you don't have detailed notes, you're going to have a hard time. Just let you know. Any questions or comments? You're tired. It's late. So I think now, Carl, should we ask about you returning to your groups? You seem to be able to accomplish